Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Geraghty of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. This is a special edition. Jim is still on the Alaskan cruise, but he is here with us today magically. That's because we taped before he left, but we knew that because he was releasing his book today. It's the latest installment in the Dangerous Clique series, which started with Between Two Scorpions. I think we're eventually going to get the 3 book.
Correct.
But that was briefly shelved for Hunting Four Horsemen. Then there was Gathering Five Storms, and now we have Dueling Six Demons. And so, Jim, first of all, congratulations on the latest book. I just finished reading it last night, and it is definitely a page-turner, and I think people will be fascinated by the character development and the plots and the definite twists that go along with this story. What people will also notice, if they're regular listeners to the Three Martini Lunch, is that the locations for a lot of what happens dovetail pretty well with where you've been since the Gathering Five Storms novel came out. So obviously Ukraine and also Taiwan. So explain how you took the real life experiences there and wove them into the plot lines here.
Yeah, Greg, a couple people have asked. First of all, I want to say this is one of my favorite episodes that we do roughly once every 2 years. I want to thank everyone who has not hit stop on their podcast player so far. We got to get to talk about these books that I really enjoy writing, and I get to strong-arm listeners. Like, oh, God, fine, I'll buy one. Stop talking about it. And when this podcast is done, I will release Greg's family, so he no longer has to let me hijack an entire podcast. No, so people ask me, like, how is this one different? And, for in every book, I've tried to put really fascinating, strange locations. I think they're almost a character in the book. Between Two Scorpions featured the Island of the Dolls in Mexico, the Darvaza Crater in Turkmenistan. Really weird places that are kind of fascinating and odd and almost add this surreal or supernatural vibe to the story. And there's still a couple places like that in Dueling Six Demons. But this one, as you mentioned, I've been to Ukraine twice in the past year. Did a stopover in Transnistria, or Soviet Disneyland, as I like to call it, and a trip to Taiwan last fall. And unsurprisingly, this book has scenes that begin in Ukraine, a stop in Transnistria in the middle, and there's Taiwan a little later in the story. And, they are trouble spots. They are flashpoints. In the case of Ukraine, an actual shooting war, in Taiwan, a site we hope never becomes a shooting war, but certainly people are very nervous about that in the coming years. And Transnistria, as I alluding to it being Soviet Disneyland, this is what happens when either you could say there's Russian control or you are part of a strange pro-communist remnant of the Cold War that wants to be part of Russia and yearns to be part of Russia and still has a lot of hammer and sickles around. And, the cafe that the characters eat in is very much inspired by my day there, and the USSR canteen, the Hard Rock Cafe for people who yearn for Stalin. Sometimes I've had a really bizarre... This past year has been more like the lives of my characters than ever before. Generally really cool and exciting. I probably could have done without the Russian rockets being fired at Kyiv when I was there, but that's life in a war zone. And it just, I would experience these things and I'd say, I got to put this in the next book. I've always wanted to make it sound like, tell stories that seemed unbelievable, that seemed otherworldly and fascinating, but were actually true. And you could, if you got enough frequent flyer miles, you can go out and visit any of these places. I wouldn't recommend Ukraine for a while. Stay there or stay in Lviv. That's a little safer side.
Yeah, and significant things happen in all of these locations in the course of this novel. Just one chapter in Transnistria, but it's kind of an important one. We'll leave that little nugget there for folks to chew on. And of course, go get the book at Amazon and wherever else the book is available. But definitely, you are going to get some real-life insights into the locations in this story based on what you've heard previously from Jim about his visits to Ukraine and Transnistria and Taiwan. All right, Jim, our next martini as it relates to Dueling Six Demons kind of deals with how you put the story together. For those who have read any of the novels, you know that the Dangerous Clique is this assemblage of essentially 6 people who are affiliated with the intelligence community, but have a lot of latitude, shall we say. And then you have to figure out what it is that they're trying to solve, what they're trying to stop, usually racing against the clock in some way, whether it's based on where you've been or things that are in the news. How do you decide what the Dangerous Clique is going to be working on this time?
Sure. Well, for those who have suspected, yes, almost everyone in the story, all the protagonists have someone in real life where I've started from. It is really not much of a secret that the Ward character is inspired by my good friend Cam Edwards. He's the gun guy. He's the rough and tough guy who can take care of almost anything. Other friends are not public figures, but they recognize themselves. And I should point out that, like, I start with someone and then I change them as I need to for the story. If I need D needs to be the hacker, the friend this is inspired, this is not a hacker, then this character becomes a hacker. So details about the characters will change, but it kind of starts with that personality, that clarity, something about them that I think makes them a really kind of fun character. The other thing which I should point out is that, look, I love the work of Brad Thor, Matt Betley. There are all kinds of terrific thriller writers out there. Mark Greaney, a lot of these folks, Brad Taylor, all of who I've been able to send copies of this series to, and they've written nice things and given me blurbs, and they're terrific. Generally, these guys are either ex-military or extraordinarily well-researched, and I'm not ex-military. I do try to research extensively every location, every dynamic, every technology, all this stuff as best I can. But I've had somebody say that your books feel like 24 staffed by the cast of The Office. And there is a bit of, like, there's a lot of, these are, but for my thriller standards, these are exceptionally, I'm going to say lighthearted, but there's a lot of snarky wisecracking. Kind of like you get on the Three Martini Lunch podcast, that there's kind of this tone of irreverence, this tone of, the characters do get serious when they need to, but one of the ways they deal with the tension of their lives, which involves something generally in the realm of counterterrorism. The idea is that back around the time of the start of the Iraq War, a brilliant but somewhat eccentric deputy director of the CIA was like, I'd love to have a team where I could just give them a problem and fix it. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions. Go to it. Go take care of this problem. And generally, the mission would be find up-and-coming terrorists and kill them before they can grow up and to become bigger and better terrorists. This is kind of the taking out the farm team of the terrorist organizations around the world. They don't necessarily take on the Osama bin Ladens. They don't, it's kind of this idea that they're working in the background. They have a hacker who's been trained by the NSA. They have an FBI agent for when they need to operate on U.S. soil. And one of the other great kind of dynamics that I enjoy doing is, like, so I give them a problem and I think, how would somebody from the FBI approach it? And they'd be thinking about, how do we get a conviction? And somebody from the NSA, this is an analytical problem. This is a, data problem. How do we approach that? The character inspired by Cam, Ward, is a former U.S. Army Ranger. How do we shoot the problem? How do I, that stuff? And kind of each one has their own approach to how to solve the problem. And it usually there's some fun friction that way of them all kind of being infuriated with the way everybody approaches. But the characters, much like their real life counterparts, are friends, and they all eventually, it all works out in the end, usually. The other kind of fun thing is to create endings that feel satisfactory. I'm very much a big believer in the idea that your protagonists have to earn the happy ending if there's going to be a happy ending. Because of the way life works, it is very satisfying to create an ending that isn't a perfect ending, where, they've saved the day. Maybe somebody got away. Maybe there was some important collateral damage. Maybe their bosses are mad at them. Life is complicated, and it very rarely gives you that wrapped in a bow perfect ending. And through each story, there's kind of the other kind of fun thing has been they called the Dangerous Clique. One of the reasons that my group of friends was once called a clique, which we all found hilarious because we never thought ourselves. We always thought we were the ones who were left out of being part of a clique. And so the idea, though, is that they work kind of separate from the rest of the agency. They don't like to work well with others. From the very beginning story, there's been this point of the suspicion that the CIA has a mole and that someone's been selling American secrets on the black market for years. And the less anybody else at the agency knows what they're doing, the safer everybody is. And so the idea is that maybe not everybody else in the agency thinks very well of them, thinks of them as a bunch of cowboys, and thinks of them as glory hounds and folks who are always gallivanting off and operating on their own rules and not telling anybody else what they're doing. And so this comes to a head in this one, the suspicion that and also I think the intriguing and fun thing for this one was Alec and Katrina, the two main protagonists, have gone through a massive life change, and they are aging. They are now looking at a point of, do they still want to do this really dangerous stuff, or is it getting to the time in life where they need to sit behind a desk and have a more predictable and more safe life? And Katrina returns from an absence at the agency. I'm trying not to spoil what happens in the preceding two books, but let's just say a very natural life change. It'll be familiar for anyone who read Heavy Lifting, my nonfiction book about parenting and such. And they come back in this sense of, things are not good at the agency. The morale is low. They've had some very bad things happen in the not too distant past, and it's kind of nice to start them with this sense of, they're underdogs again. Things are going wrong. Things are bad, and that there's now these new massive, seemingly insurmountable problems for them to fix.
Quick follow-up on the research. How much detail do you feel like is the right balance between filling people in on exactly what's happening and overkill?
That is a great question, and I think I have botched that in the past, in that people thought that the second book in the series, Hunting for Horsemen, which I wrote during COVID, as you alluded to in the beginning, book 3, I think is a fun story. It was going to be about the long-lost diary of their mentor character, and I was going to fill it up with all kinds of real-world disclosed secrets of the CIA, things that seem like conspiracy theories, like the Dalai Lama being on the CIA payroll for a bunch of years. That's true, by the way. The idea would be in this fictional world that hadn't been revealed, and that this, this diary was like a ticking time bomb of secrets if they ever came exposed. Problem is, I had it largely completed. COVID hit, and then it just felt like very small stakes when the world was literally coming to a halt, and we're trying to figure out where this virus came from. So I started thinking about what would my characters be doing when COVID was going on, and then I started thinking about, well, what would they be doing right after COVID? What would the world be like right after COVID? Look, I'm thankful every bit of praise, and I'm also welcome the constructive criticism. Constructive criticism, folks out there. But that one, some people said was a little more preachy, or also because that one was about genetically engineering viruses to target particular genes. That was about as Michael Crichton-y as I get, diving into the science of that. And I think I might have, not balanced that as perfectly in this one. This one involves a bunch of cool technologies, but a big one in it is quantum computing. And this one, I think I got it right. It'll be interesting to see how readers feel like I got, just enough for you, the reader. If you're if you read about this and you're fascinated, great. There are a whole bunch of terrific books out there, nonfiction. A bunch of them that I read and understood large parts of them. Quantum computing is not a simple topic, or it can be. And trying to create a story in which one of my friends did a demonstration with a coin that is described in this novel, and that kind of was like, oh, quantum computing. Okay, that's the next big thing. That is and kind of describing the possibility of quantum computing being this ultimate code breaker. And that, if your job is keeping secrets, or your job is finding out other countries' secrets, obviously quantum computing is a huge deal, and it would be the sort of thing you'd want to, somebody discovering this would be world changing. And that's kind of as much as I will say about what's happening in Dueling Six Demons.
All right, Jim, on to our last martini as it relates to your brand new Dangerous Clique novel, Dueling Six Demons. And as you go throughout the novel, not only is there the particular plot that's unfolding, but there are a lot of allusions to things that are really happening in the world. As you've said, it's really cut from the real world. And perhaps in this one, maybe more than others, and maybe it's due to the plot that unfolds, it seems like certain characters, and maybe one that resembles you more than any other, is a little more cynical about government in general, from the top on down, and even at the top of the intelligence community. So is that a shift on your part, or is it just the development of the characters?
The short answer is yeah. Now, I've always tried to write these, if not apolitical. Somebody reading Between Two Scorpions said, you could absolutely see my worldview and my values and what I consider to be important coming through on every page. But at the same time, there was never any, vote for this guy, vote for that guy, thinly veiled political characters. So in Between Two Scorpions, there's a terrorist threat emerging that, would be big news that the whole country is responding to. And you kind of feel at some point you need to say what the president is doing. Now, lots of other authors will create a generic president or a fictional president, and that's fine, President John Jones or something like that. But I kind of felt like in the Trump years, when you have a generic sounding president, it's not taking place in the real world. It's not taking place in the world you recognize. So I never named the president, but there's a sequence in which the unnamed president in Between Two Scorpions, we're going to kill these guys. They're absolute animals. And you know who the president is, right? And in Gathering Five Storms, some other unnamed president goes on this long, meandering soliloquy while trying to announce the fact that they've stopped an attempted terrorist attack on CIA headquarters. And the White House press secretary, who may or may not sound like Jen Psaki, could be anybody, is trying to usher the president off the stage as he rambles. But that could be any president, right? So that's my way of kind of alluding the fact that to make the fictional world of the characters feel like the world that you, the reader, are living in. The other thing is that I decided early on that two of the characters, Ward and Katrina, would be shaped by Afghanistan, would be shaped by their experience, the idea that they're of the age where being in the CIA and being in the U.S. Army Rangers, they would have been in Afghanistan at that time. And I've always had this thing about when you have your heroes save the world, Brad Thor tries to do this where he'll make references to previous books. Sometimes in other series, like there's no reference to the fact. And so if you read the Tom Clancy series, the U.S. had been in like 20 wars in like 10 years. And it became, after a while, you're kind of like, wait, didn't we just invade that country like 3 books ago? So the question is like, how do you make it feel like a real lived-in world? So for the climax of Gathering Five Storms, which would traditionally would be big news, I had it take place 3 days before the fall of Kabul. And so the idea that, it was big news, but then everything happened in Afghanistan, and that's why the public really doesn't remember it, and it's not a big deal, and it just passed out of the news cycle very quickly. In this one, I think, people look, you talk to Afghanistan veterans, and Greg, you talk to veterans all the time. The fall of Kabul hurt them, their souls a lot. They felt like they had sacrificed blood and treasure to give that country a better chance. And watching the withdrawal, really, they felt it. And so look, this happened on President Biden's watch. I just think it's natural that the characters would come away with a greater cynicism about those above the agency, about the president, National Security Council, everybody else. And then in this one, there is just this question, this nagging fear of like, well, we know there's this threat out there. If we go to our superiors, will they do the right thing about them, or will they be looking for a politically expedient answer? And, is there going to be a desire to actually confront the threat, or is there going to be a desire to sweep the threat under the rug until Election Day or something like that? And that's just kind of that vibe, I suspect is probably something that's happening throughout our government. And I think that it is almost an inevitable consequence of some of the policies we've had over that. There's also an allusion to an unnamed former president who's constantly screaming that the CIA, FBI, and everyone else is part of a deep state. And I think if you're trying to put criminals behind bars, and I think if you're trying to inform the U.S. government the best it can about the threats that are overseas, that probably causes a great deal of cynicism when you see somebody saying you're part of the villains, you're part of the problem. Now, as listeners to this podcast can know, Peter Strzok, John Brennan, there are some people we've got some beefs with. There are some, this is not a wholehearted thing, but just kind of the idea of my characters always trying to have their moral compass pointing towards true north, and having frustrations with the rest of the U.S. government, and having a sense that is not always what motivates everybody else in government. Try not to be too preachy, but just kind of this sense of like, this is kind of the mood in this place. I try to leave it with the sense that things are okay, but there's always this sense that at any given moment, the Dangerous Clique team feels like they could get scapegoated for political expedience reasons. So it kind of adds another dynamic to the characters, some other threat or problem that's always lurking out there in the background. And another reason they're not particularly eager to let anybody else know what they're doing when they're, making people die in dark alleys and shooting them and stuff like that.
Well, the plot moves very quickly. If you've already read the books, you know the characters well, and you'll pick right up. And again, some terrific plot twists. I believe it sets up very, very well for the next series. I don't know what it would be 7 of, but Jim does, and he'll let us know in due time. But
no, I have no idea. It's suggestions welcome. Something. It's always got to be something 7 something. So for a while, it's been a lot of like. I could do Among 7 Somethings. I could do, but actually, here, that's the title. Among 7 Somethings, coming soon, coming summer 2026.
In the meantime, sir, enjoy the rest of your cruise, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you soon, Greg.
Jim Geraghty, National Review, and the author of Dueling Six Demons, the latest in the Dangerous Clique series. Pick up your copy today. Order it from Amazon or wherever you normally get it. I assume you've read the previous 3 installments, and if you haven't, order those too. He's Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to our podcast. If you haven't already, tell your friends to do it as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Geraghty. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great day and join us again tomorrow for the next 3 Martini Lunch.